How's it going, guys? Welcome back to Crafting Cars. Today is Happy Tuesdays podcast, episode 7. And I'm doing it alone. That's all right. A little outside my comfort zone, but I mean, I have been recording YouTube videos for a while, alone for a long time. I'm just not, I'm not a yapper like my girlfriend is. I swear, she starts every day drinking a yappuccino, or caramel yappe, if you will. For lunch, she has a yapperoni and cheese. But I've been good. So I've been e-biking. I got a Ride 1-Up Rev 1 full suspension e-bike, and the thing's fast, and it's really spiced up my life, spiced up my commute, and it's been fun. We got one of Lauren's family members had an old bike, 1998 Mongoose, sitting in the shed. I did a quick restoration on that bike for her. New tires, new seat, brake job, just quick tune-up. And we've been biking together, and it's been a lot of fun. And, Halloween. I hope you guys had a good Halloween. We went out with friends, just a quick little party night. And Lauren and I dressed up as Kay and Joy from Blade Runner 2049, if you know what that is. So that was pretty cool. But anyway, the meat and potatoes of today's video is going to be this thing right here. My 1997 Honda Civic EX Coupe. I'm going to be talking about the past of the car, the present, and the future of this thing. And it starts way back. Way back. Let my voice be the brush here, and your brain's the canvas. I don't know if I'll post any videos or any pictures along with this podcast, just because I don't have too much time to do that today. But you could check my Instagram and go back on the YouTube for all that stuff if you're really curious. But this car, I originally sat in it when I was in elementary school. My dad had purchased it, I believe, out of a newspaper. Back when you could pop open that newspaper and you had like the black and white pictures of all the cars. And I don't remember exactly how much he paid. I want to say it was around like $5,000 to $6,000, but I'm not 100% sure. So this must have been around like 2003, 2004. And he'd drive me back and forth to school with this thing. I remember he drove it pretty spirited. He definitely had fun driving it, and he'd listen to had a CD player in there, so he'd listen to Tool CDs and all that good stuff. And yeah, a lot of cool memories in the car. That's just that's all I can remember from that time, just buzzing back and forth to school. But I remember I enjoyed the car quite a bit. And then eventually he sold it to my sister. And so she daily drove it for 4 years throughout high school. And the only change she made to it was a pair of black Koenig wheels, which aren't really my taste. They're black Koenigs with like the silver lip around them. And yeah, I don't really like that style of wheels, but everyone's got their thing. And so, yeah, I mean, I rode in there a couple of times, and the Civic just started out as a plain, like I said, 97 Civic EX Coupe. It was automatic. Had a lot of options though, air conditioning, heat, power windows, power sunroof, nice clean interior, CD player, everything you needed. I think it was pretty much fully spec'd EX at the time. But it was rocking just the Steelies with the hubcaps, kind of the razor blade looking hubcaps, which they weren't too bad looking. And so, yeah, she drove that for 4 years. And then when I was 15, it was kind of my time to get in the car. So when I was learning to drive, I experimented a little bit, just with my family members' cars. And my dad he's always buying and selling cars. So I drove a couple of those. So I drove my grandpa's Subaru Baja. That wasn't too bad. Sturdy build, but that thing was rotten out. So we got rid of that car. I drove a Pontiac Montana minivan. That was all right. Acceleration was good, but obviously minivan wasn't really for me. What else? I've just practiced around whatever my mom was daily driving a 4Runner at the time, so I drove around in that a little bit. When I was like really little, my dad would let me drive his trucks around a couple times. And so yeah, now was my time to find my daily driver, my first car. So although I had been kind of, trying out different chassis and everything, it was time for me to, settle on something. And I had two options. I had this 1997 Honda Civic or a 2006 Pontiac Grand Prix. It wasn't the GT, it was just a regular model. And the Grand Prix was much nicer car. And my dad said, all right, you could buy the Civic for $1,500 or the Grand Prix for $3,000. Well, at this point, I might have had $500 to my name. So I went with the cheaper option, the 97 Civic. However, I wonder how much different my life would be now if I would have chose the Grand Prix. Because I was still into cars back then. It's not like the Civic got me into cars. But I don't know. I mean, like, I wonder if I would have ended up back in a Honda, because at the times, like, I didn't have much money, but I was into modifying cars. And for someone who wants to get started modifying cars, can you name a better platform? No, you can't. So maybe I would have ended up back in a Civic. I don't know. Or maybe I would have just went like the Pontiac route. Maybe now I'd be in a G8 or like a Grand Prix GXP or something. And maybe I'd have a lot more money in my pocket. I don't know. But I went with the Civic, and that's where my story begins. So, yeah, 15 years old, I was working at Fleet Farm at the time. Throughout high school, I worked at Fleet Farm, Menards, and then in college, I worked at O'Reilly's. But anyway, I was working at Fleet Farm at the time, making payments on this thing, and just, learn how to drive, just making the most of the D16 Y8 power plant in there. I drove this thing hard, probably a lot harder than I should have, but I had a lot of fun with the car. Over my high school years, I did do some really tacky mods to it, especially in like my high school auto shop class. Like, I took the hubcaps off. I plasti dipped the hubcaps before. I spray painted my Steely silver and put some blue lug nuts on there. At one point, I plasti dipped my hood black. That looked terrible. Took it off. Let's see. I plasti dipped eyelids on my headlights. I had just a plastic replacement front bumper with that was matte black front bumper with the Type R style lip on there. The pre-facelift the 96 to 98 Type R replica plastic lip screwed on there. That wasn't too bad, but I had carbon fiber vinyl wrap little pieces inside the interior. I wrapped the door handles, the gas cap. What else did I do? I had like that tacky AutoZone Honda sticker. It's like 3 feet long, 6 inches tall. You guys have probably seen it. Had that one plastered on the rear glass there. I had a Rising Sun spray painted behind the license plate panel. That actually didn't look too bad. I just did like a dark gray on top of the green. If I haven't mentioned yet, this car was originally G82P, Cypress Green Metallic Pearl. That kind of nice forest dark green color. And then the tackiest thing I ever did was fake hood scoop. But I had it on the roof of the car. I remember when I bought that thing, I was outside of an AutoZone, and I was deciding, I was like, did I put it on the roof or the hood? I'd place it on one, and I'd back up and look at it. Place it on the next, back up and look at it. And eventually there was a bystander that walked by, and he's like, it looks better on the hood. Looks better on the hood, man. Okay. I still ended up putting it on the roof just because that's what I'd known from Need for Speed and Fast and Furious. You know, Brian's got the Eclipse with the roof scoop, and I was really into rally at the time, and I loved all the rally STIs that had the little vent on the hood and everything. So obviously it wasn't functional, but I liked the way it looked at the time. But, as I got older, a little more mature, I started taking those, piece by piece off the car. And as far as like any serious modifications going down in high school as a senior, I blew the engine. I was rough on this thing. A lot of like toge runs where we had this like really twisty road down in downtown Hudson, Wisconsin there. And the poor residents of that street, but it was called Trout Brook, and the whole road was just like perfect for driving enthusiasts. Unfortunately, there were houses on the road as well. But I drove it so hard, and it wasn't long until the D16 Y8 engine in there started knocking. Uncle Rodney started knocking, and it was time for a new engine. So we had the local muffler shop, who my dad were friends with, help us out finding a new engine. We got a new one swapped in there. It must have been a junkyard motor, because shortly after it blew the head gasket, but we got that fixed in there, and then it ran me pretty good for the rest of my senior year and into kind of like my first years of college. But it was this is a car I don't think I want to get rid of, because there was so many memories through high school and college where, just like me and my friends would go on fishing trips in this thing. I'd load kayaks on top of the roof and bring the fishing poles inside, and just the inside of the car would just smell like fish and sweaty high school boys. So it's been through a lot. There was one time I cracked one of the rear windows by pulling a kayak off the roof, and the tip of it came down on the corner of the rear window and shattered it. I drove it, in the winter and in the summer. It was all year round daily driver. And so I did end up, in the future have to deal with some rust issues and stuff from living in the salt belt. But I remember in the wintertime, it was like every day before school, I'd find a parking lot and I would just do e-brake turns, just little drifts for like an hour before school every single day. I was obsessed. And there was one day I actually crashed it though. I just I dented the rear quarter was fine, but like the little patch panel under the taillight was dented, the taillight was cracked, and I cracked the rear bumper. So that was a small little fender bender I got in. So I fixed that. It was once again, like my dad knew like a local shop. So I was able to fix that for not too much money. And so those are all like the major things. Into college, I remember, I think it was like my first year of college, it gave me my first oil leak. It was a real nasty one where it was dripping from the VTEC solenoid. I didn't know at the time, but it was going right on the exhaust and it was just smoking like crazy. It seemed like a fire hazard every time I drove it, and the interior were just filled with smoke. So I needed another car because I didn't really have the time or the money to fix it at the time or the troubleshooting skills. So my dad had a 2011 Jeep Patriot, and I drove that as a daily driver for a while. I bought that for $75, but I think I ended up paying like $85 by the time I was all done making payments to my dad on the car. And before I was even done making payments, that car shit the bed. So that one had CVT issues. That's popular. They use the Nissan Jatco transmission on that Jeep Patriot, and it's just garbage. And sure enough, it went out on me. I replaced it with a 1997 Honda CRV, and I've been a CRV fanboy ever since. But we're not talking about those lame SUVs. We're talking about the Civic in this episode. So yeah, into college, I was repping the Civic for a while. Since I was rocking two cars, I had daily driver and the Civic on the side. Now I can start messing with this thing a little bit more serious. So I started vinyl wrapping it. At one point, I had the car vinyl wrapped with like an initial D themed. It was all gloss white with a fake carbon hood, and that was a pretty good look. I met some friends in college. I met Gideon in college, and he had a friend that is Gideon and Duck. In their spare time, when they were a little younger, they built a Vitara build D series, which is a low compression, the single cam engine, pretty big turbo, and they kind of had like a little bit of a turbo kit pieced together, and most importantly, they had a manual transmission. And they talked me into swapping my Civic. So while I was driving the Jeep around, I did the Vitara swap on my Civic. Just kind of, it was a budget swap, I just sourced as many cheap parts as I could from Amazon, eBay. I was just a broke college student at the time. But I was making it work, I was living I was at a friend's house for a while, a little like student living apartment for a while. And so it went from a D16 Y8 to a D16 Z6 with a Y8 head. And although that engine gave me a lot of problems throughout the years, it was a lot of fun and I learned a ton. So, there was many times where I'd have to fix my exhaust. My oil pressure would drop to zero and I'd have to find out why. There was one time like all the, or at least like half of the valve train nuts fell off the valve train into the oil pan and they were getting sucked up into the oil pan pickup tube. There was one time where the paint was peeling off the inside of the oil pan and plugging up the oil pickup tube. All sorts of good things. I think I had to replace the turbo on it once. Did a couple transmission things. So, I pushed forward, and I drove it quite a bit in college, and it was a lot of fun. I mean, I went from a 127 crank horsepower car to a car pushing, I believe it was 290. I think I made 295 with the D series in this thing. And honestly, I love the power band. That D series felt good. It felt really good. But after driving it for, I think, about 2.5 years of kind of hard daily driving, eventually it rod knocked. So lost oil pressure. Uncle Rodney was knocking. And I remember I was driving it to work. I was living at Gideon's house at this point. And yeah, it blew. It left me on the side of the highway. And it sounded so bad. It was like the loudest knocking. It had been knocking for like a month already. And it was really bad this day. And I kind of had the feeling, I was like, all right, today's the day. I was on my 30-minute commute into work. And sure enough, I'm on the highway, and all of a sudden it sounded like someone took like a glass jar full of like bolts and maybe like jewelry and stuff and just slammed it on the asphalt. And there I was on the side of the highway, smoke coming out of the hood, and rod poking through the block. So that was my first time putting a window in a Honda block. A little bit before it blew up, though, I just painted the car. And so I didn't actually do the paint job myself. I just did all the prep work in Gideon's garage. I was living with him at the time. And then I drove it to a coworker's house, and he sprayed it all this nice Summit Racing Battleship Gray. And it was an okay paint job. Didn't look too bad. He did single stage and then did some clear coat over it. And so I rocked it like that for a while. And you guys saw, this kind of brings us up to the start of the YouTube channel. So I had the gray Civic. At this point, I think the D series was out, and I had just picked up a B series. Man, was I excited for this. I think it was only $1,500 for the swap. It was, it's really rough looking B16 A3. It looked like you pulled it out the bottom of a lake. The engine was terrible looking, but it came with the axles, a P30 ECU, a lot of good stuff. So it was actually a pretty good deal. So I went to work, started the YouTube channel. I was like, all right, with all the adventures I had with my D series and I didn't record videos, for this adventure with the B series, I want to look back on this stuff. And I'm so glad I did, because it's so fun looking back on my old YouTube videos. And I was just a little baby back then when I built the B16 for the first time. So we did the whole 9 yards, I sourced a GSR transmission. I did a top to bottom refresh on that engine. We built put some cams in there, went through the whole cylinder head, filmed all that, did the blocks. I think the cylinders were maybe a little bit out of round, but I tried my best boring them out, put new piston rings in there. We did new rod bearings and everything. ACL oil pump, which that was probably a bad idea. I think that might have led to the failure of the engine. Put that all together, slapped it in the car. The car was looking good. I drove without a hood for a while. We had a bottom mount turbo manifold. I just kind of pieced a little bit better components for this build. Just saw Facebook Marketplace. I wasn't using any cheap eBay stuff anymore. Took it to a couple car shows. Everything was good. But then I took it to the dyno, and I think we made close to I think it was like mid 300s or something, but unfortunately the car did not survive its first dyno session with the B series. So got home. At this point, I was living here. So I had the shell of the Civic in the garage, and the B series I pulled out, started tearing it down, ended up putting it all back together. And this time we did some upgrades. So I ended up buying a new cylinder head for it with all Ferrera valve components. So it had, better valves, better, dual springs on either side, all titanium stuff. And I sold my mountain bike to buy that head, because my old head had some issues where it was cracking next to the oil galley plugs when I tried to remove them. But anyway, and then my block, I wasn't messing around anymore. I wanted to make some serious power, and I wanted to do it reliably. I wanted to do it reliably. So I sent the block over to CSS, and I had them do all the machining, overboard the block, and then put in some new oversized pistons and bearings, sent it back to me. I slapped it back together. I was still running the bottom mount turbo kit, but I remember I took it to DB Performance, my boy Shane at DB Performance, and I think we made 415 with that setup, and it took 19 pounds of boost, and it was pretty nice. I mean, it was a nice build. It was fast. I ran into some issues here and there with smoking, and I went through a turbo. I had oil scavenge pumps that I had to run. Since the turbo sat so low, it wouldn't gravity drain into the oil pan. So I had to run a turbo oil scavenge pump to suck the oil out of the pan out of the turbo into the pan. But I kept burning those up. I found out later that the rubber seals inside that pump, like the diaphragm, they were pretty sensitive to heat. And since I had it so close to the turbo, I was melting those diaphragm pumps, and they wouldn't work. And then, of course, the oil would back up inside the turbo, out the exhaust, and that's why it smoked so bad. So I had to deal with that issue, got that taken care of. A couple years went by. During that time, I had picked up sponsorship from PLM. They helped me pay for some parts, so I kind of switched over to a top mount setup, got a better radiator intercooler, and then I did some fabrication myself. I did like a 3-inch exhaust all the way back custom. I did custom 3-inch intercooler piping, and then when I took that to the dyno, all right, now the engine was running really good. No more smoke. We made 408 horsepower with only 15 PSI of boost, which was awesome. Sorry, a little burp there. But also during this time, now the engine was solid, and the engine is still very solid to this day. Really great runner. I'm having some issues with the differential, but that's not really my problem anymore. But during that time, I messed with the suspension quite a bit, just to try to get the car handling more predictable. And I remember before I went wide body, I got it pretty close to driving how I liked it. And then I went wide body, did the paint job and everything. I remember I went through so many different style wide bodies that I wanted to do on this car. I was thinking just going like the plastic fender flare route, maybe looking at some kits, but I didn't really like the kits. So I started sketching my own kits, like, hey, maybe I can make something out of fiberglass. So I made some fiberglass fender flares, some carbon fiber fender flares. And then eventually I was like, screw this. What if I hit a hole and crack one of these fender flares? It's going to suck. What if I made a steel wide body? So now I've got a steel wide body on the car. That was a big leap of faith. It was definitely outside of my comfort zone to do all that metal work and body work. It was my first time. And then painting a car, I learned so much. But yeah, now we have a really awesome looking result. So yeah, just in the last year here, we got the nice, last kind of year and a half, we got the nice paint job, all the body work done, Lexan windows. But then we also upgraded to these big wheels here and tires. And now with the wide body and we got plenty of grip, which is awesome. However, sometimes it's actually nice to have a little bit of spinning on your Honda. The reason being is when your tires grip up, it's so much more wear on, because something's got to give, you know. I snapped an axle once launching the car, you know. So now it's like I had upgraded axles, but something else is given. So with the current suspension setup, like my tubular subframe and everything, I still only run rubber mounts everywhere. And that's cool and all. It drives all right. But under high load, or especially like the roads around here, if you don't have like a perfectly flat surface or like you're just driving highways all the time, this thing is so unpredictable under load. It's scary, where I almost don't want to ride with passenger because it feels like you're just going to get tossed into the ditch. I mean, if I go to a drag strip or like a track, it's fine. But it's the power is not usable on the streets around here, which is kind of my main issue with the car now. It's a lot of fun, and by myself, it's an absolute riot. I love it. But then, yeah, this is always I always want more from the car, which is crazy. So you know, currently the current setup on the car, we've got basically a 3-inch wider track width in the front and the rear. I'm running big 17-inch wheels. They are spaced out, but we will be fixing that with custom wheels pretty soon here. Hopefully in the next couple months we'll be getting new wheels. And then I'm rocking 225/40 R17s, and they're sticky and they do their job, but almost too well. It's like I almost want to go back to like a regular street tire. But yeah, so I said this is the car now. But we're going to be making some really big changes soon. So now we're at the point of the video where we could talk about the future of this build. Oh, before that, I got a nice mural under the hood too. That was a big part of the car too. Got the nice mural under the hood, the carbon hood and trunk. Anyway, so yeah, that's the car now. But where I'm looking at going in the future is something big. So I want to make a big change to the car, but I don't want to spend too much money. So what I'm going to do is sell a lot of the components I have in here now. So I've already started parting out the car. And so I know a lot of people are going to be upset about that. I'm not selling the shell though. I'm keeping the shell. But I'm selling the swap, the transmission. I'll probably keep the wheels, but eventually, like I said, I'm getting different wheels. All our suspension components, the subframes, gauge cluster. I'm basically parting out everything internally that you see here. Everything but the shell of the car. And the reason for that is I'm going rear wheel drive. So I'm jumping on that train. So you guys watched a couple of videos, like Throttle did the K20 swapped EK with the wide body and the S2000 drivetrain. And then if you watch Jimmy Oaks, you see he did that Nissan where he did like a 240SX drivetrain, subframes and everything with his Civic. I'm going to be doing something similar with my Civic, but I won't tell you just yet what I'm going to choose for an engine or what I'm going to choose for a drivetrain. But just know that in the next couple years, this will be a rear-wheel drive Civic and naturally aspirated, but still making over 250 horsepower, over 250 foot-pounds of torque. I'm not using any all-wheel drive Honda components. I don't plan on using any, K-Series or B series components anymore. I'm not LS swapping it. But it's going to have around 3.5 liters of displacement, and it's probably still going to be 5-speed, but yeah, it'll have rear differential, and it'll be a rear-wheel drive Civic. And this is going to be definitely my biggest project yet, but it's going to include a lot of custom fabrication, which I'm trying to get more and more into. And it's definitely going to be one of a kind, and it's going to be awesome, and it's going to drive amazing. I'm not going to spoil too much more than that, but just know the next coming videos here, on top of some of my extra projects like my Legend head gasket, is going to be pulling apart the Civic. So don't freak out. It's going to be okay. We're going a new route, and the new route I'm going, I know I'm going to love it a lot more. I want to go something with more predictable handling, closer to OEM steering geometry, and something with some high displacement, torque, and horsepower. Streetability is the name of the game for me now, especially since that's mainly what I want. And maybe in the future, AC, power steering, stuff like that. I don't want to spoil too much, but my main goal for the car in the future, I guess, would be I just want to get out there. I want to drive the car, and I want it to feel predictable enough where I could be foot to the floor, confident in the corners, don't have to worry about excessive torque steer. I want it to be reliable enough where I could drive it to the track it, and take it back home without issue. I still want it to be tunable, so I want to be still using an aftermarket ECU, whether it be Haltech or Mega Squirt or Fuel Tech. I'm still deciding on that. And yeah, I want something kind of unique, something that stands out, something one of a kind. And it will be the first build of its kind. So yeah, and I don't want to start with a new project car. That's another thing. Some people will probably say, "Oh, why don't you just go buy an S2000 or keep the Civic and buy a Miata or buy something like that." Well, I don't want an S2000. I don't want a Miata, and frankly, I can't afford either of those cars. And after hearing the story of my Civic and everything, there's absolutely no way I could sell this thing. It's my first car. I know so many people who sell their first car and come back, 30 years later regretting it, and then they'll find something like it and pay like 50, 60 grand for it. I don't want that to be me. I want to keep this chassis. But it'll be down for a while. It might be down. I might not drive this thing for 2 years. We'll see. The speed of this build will be all kind of depending on support and sponsorships. I'm going to try my best as well. So yeah, that's all I got for you guys. I know that's probably a big shock. But like I said, if you start seeing me tearing down the Civic or start seeing me making posts of partying out the Civic, don't freak out. I'm not getting rid of the Civic. It's just becoming something even more special. So thanks again for tuning in to Crafting Cars. I hope you enjoyed today's podcast episode. A little shorter one. But yeah, I'll see you next Tuesday. We're going to be... the next Tuesday's video, I'm either going to be pulling the swap or wrapping up the Legend build. So stay tuned and find out. Bye-bye.